The grand chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with the low hum of hushed voices. Representatives from over 50 different alien civilizations were seated around an enormous round table, their unique forms shifting in the soft light. Some were humanoid, others were strange, swirling masses of energy. Some communicated through telepathy, others spoke in tones too high-pitched for human ears to hear. The room itself seemed to hum with an ancient energy, a sense of authority that had existed for millennia. This was the heart of galactic governance, the place where the fate of entire star systems was decided. Today, however, there was an unusual atmosphere. The usual calm dignity of the chamber was shaken by uncertainty and fear. Emperor Zothar, the long-reigning monarch of the galaxy, had died unexpectedly. Zothar, an ancient being whose lifespan stretched over 1,000 years, had been more than just a ruler. He was a symbol of peace and unity, a being so powerful and wise that his mere presence kept the galaxy from falling into chaos. His death left a massive void in the galaxy, and the Council was scrambling to fill it. "We must choose a successor," said High Chancellor Nera, a towering, golden-skinned alien with sharp, angular features. Her voice echoed in the room, filled with authority and urgency. She had served as the Council's leader for decades, but she was now facing the impossible task of filling the shoes of an emperor who had been irreplaceable. The balance of the galaxy is fragile. The Dark Reavers are waiting for an opportunity to strike. We cannot afford to delay. The Council members murmured their agreement. The Dark Reavers were a mysterious force, known only for their ruthless invasions and manipulation of galactic politics. They had been lurking in the shadows for centuries, waiting for the right moment to destabilize the galaxy. The Council knew that whoever succeeded Emperor Zothar would need to be powerful, wise, and, most importantly, someone who could unify the galaxy against the Reavers' growing influence. Ambassador Xian, a reptilian creature from the planet Tyrax, stood up and cleared his throat. "We must follow tradition," he said. His yellow eyes gleamed with a cold intensity. "For centuries, the throne has passed to a member of one of the great alien houses. We cannot afford to break with tradition now. The power of the throne is too great to entrust to someone outside the established lineages." His words were met with nods from many of the Council members. It was true. The throne had always been passed to the most powerful among the galaxy's great species. The Zeralians, known for their technological advancements and vast interstellar empire, had held the throne several times. The Lefarians, a race of wise and noble beings who valued peace above all, had also been chosen in the past. And the Tyraxians, with their military prowess, had always been seen as a strong contender. But even as Ambassador Xian spoke, there was a growing sense of unease in the chamber. No one could deny that something was changing in the galaxy. The old ways were no longer enough to solve the problems of the present. The galaxy was becoming more interconnected, more complex. The threat of the Dark Reavers was not something that could be dealt with by simply following old traditions. And then, just as the murmuring voices began to rise again, a soft voice interrupted. It was Princess Nyara, the young ruler of the Zeralian Empire. She was seated at the far side of the room, her long silver hair flowing like a waterfall down her back, her eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. Unlike the other council members, Nyara was not yet fully grown. At only 25 years old, she was young by Zeralian standards, but her wisdom far exceeded her years. "I disagree," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Tradition may have served us in the past, but the times are changing. We cannot continue to choose our leaders based on old bloodlines and power struggles." The room fell silent. The other council members turned to her in shock. It was rare for someone of Nyara's age to speak so boldly in the council. Her people were known for their restraint and adherence to tradition. Yet here she was, challenging centuries of established rule. "What are you suggesting, Princess?" asked High Chancellor Nera, her tone cautious but intrigued. Nyara stood up slowly, her regal presence filling the room. "I believe the galaxy needs something," different. We need a leader who is not tied to any one species, any one empire. We need someone who can unite us all, someone who understands that our strength lies in our diversity, not in our divisions. A ripple of confusion passed through the room. What was she proposing? A ruler who was not from one of the great houses. That was unthinkable. And yet, Nyara's words rang with an undeniable truth. The galaxy had grown more divided in recent years. Old alliances were crumbling. New powers were rising. If something didn't change, the galaxy would fall apart under the pressure. I have someone in mind, Nyara continued, her voice steady. A human. The mention of a human in the Galactic Council was enough to send shockwaves through the room. The council members stared at each other, uncertain whether they had heard her correctly. A human? Ambassador Xian asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. How could a mere human be our leader? They are insignificant, barely out of the Stone Age in comparison to us. Nyara turned to face Xian, her gaze unwavering. Do you remember the Terra-Solar Crisis? She asked. How Earth's people, in just a few short decades, solved an energy crisis that threatened to destabilize an entire star system. Humans have proven themselves time and time again. They possess an ingenuity that we cannot ignore. There was a murmur of agreement from some corners of the room. The Terra-Solar Crisis had been a defining moment. Earth had come up with a technology to harness the power of the sun, which had saved an entire planet from energy collapse. Many in the galaxy had underestimated humanity's potential, but the crisis had proven that humans were capable of far more than anyone had thought. But a king. Ambassador Qian still looked doubtful. Who is this human you speak of? Nyara hesitated for a moment before answering. His name is James Armitage. He is a scientist from Earth. The room erupted into whispers. James Armitage. He was hardly a well-known figure, just a young scientist with no political connections. He had no royal blood, no legacy to draw upon. And yet, Nyara was speaking of him as though he were the galaxy's savior. How can we trust such an untested individual? Asked Prime Minister Farah, a dignified figure from the Lefarian people. This is madness. It's not madness, Nyara replied firmly. It's necessity. Earth's people are unique. They've survived against all odds, and I believe they will rise to the challenge of leading us all. High Chancellor Nera watched Nyara closely. She could see the sincerity in the young princess's eyes, and though she had doubts, she knew something had to change. The galaxy could not continue down its current path. Maybe it was time for a new kind of leader. I will consider your proposal, Princess, Nara said at last, her voice grave. But we must convene the council in full to vote on this. If the galaxy is to accept a human as its new king, it must be done through unity and consensus. Nara nodded. Of course, Chancellor. As the debate continued, the representatives of the galaxy tried to process the impossible idea that a human, one of the youngest, least powerful species, could ascend to the throne. It was a gamble, but perhaps it was the only chance they had left. For better or worse, the future of the galaxy was now in the hands of someone who had no idea that his life was about to change forever. James Armitage had always considered himself an ordinary person. He was a scientist working at a research lab on Earth, focused on exploring the unknown reaches of space. His life was simple, filled with calculations, experiments, and late nights spent trying to solve complex problems about space travel and energy sources. James had no interest in politics, no ambition to become famous, and certainly no desire to rule anything, let alone the entire galaxy. But that all changed one warm evening, when a strange message arrived on his desk. It was a communique from Princess Nyara, the young ruler of the Zeralian Empire, a civilization that spanned dozens of star systems and was known for its advanced technology. James stared at the message in disbelief, wondering if someone had hacked into his computer or played a practical joke on him. The message was short, but its contents were clear. Asterisk asterisk Dear James Armitage, I am Princess Nyara of the Zeralian Empire. I write to inform you of an important matter regarding the future of the galaxy. The Galactic Council has convened, and the search for a new leader has begun. After much consideration, I have chosen you to be the next king of the galaxy. This is no mistake. You have already proven yourself to be the one who can lead us through the dark times ahead. More details will follow. Please prepare yourself for the journey ahead. Yours in trust, Princess Nyara asterisk asterisk. James blinked, rubbed his eyes, and then read the message again. His heart began to race. Was this a prank? Could this possibly be real? King of the galaxy, a human? It seemed impossible. He stared at the screen, his thoughts spinning. He had never even met Nyara. In fact, he had never been involved in galactic politics, let alone been chosen to rule the entire galaxy. The idea was so outlandish that James almost dismissed it as a hoax. But something about the message felt different. It felt real. Before he could fully process it, another message popped up on his screen. This time, it was from a different source. The subject line read, URGNT. You are expected to appear before the Galactic Council within 24 hours. The message was brief but firm, directing him to a secure communication channel where he could speak directly with the Council. This was no joke. The invitation was real. The Galactic Council's response. James spent the next few hours pacing around his small apartment, trying to make sense of what was happening. How could he, just an ordinary scientist, be chosen for something so enormous? He was just a regular guy from Earth. He wasn't royalty. He had no political experience. There had to be some mistake. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that there was no going back. If this was a mistake, he would figure it out soon enough. If not, well, he couldn't simply ignore a message from the Galactic Council. The galaxy itself was involved in this, and that made it something he couldn't walk away from. In a daze, James decided to follow the instructions. A strange feeling filled him as he sat down in front of his computer. The screen flickered, and then a holographic image of High Chancellor Nera, the leader of the Galactic Council, appeared before him. Her golden, angular face looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. James Armitage, she said in a calm, yet commanding voice. I am High Chancellor Nera of the Galactic Council. You have been chosen to be the new king of the galaxy. James felt his knees weaken. This was happening. There was no denying it anymore. I don't understand, James stammered. Why me? I'm just a scientist. I have no experience with leadership or ruling. This doesn't make any sense. Nera's eyes softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. You have been chosen because of something you did years ago, something you might not even remember. The princesses, particularly Princess Nyara, believe that you are the only one who can lead the galaxy in these troubled times. The Dark Reavers have been growing in strength, and their influence is spreading. The galaxy is in danger. James felt the weight of the words settle on his shoulders. Dark Reavers. He'd heard rumors of them, stories whispered in the corridors of space, but he had never imagined they would be such a threat. He had no idea how he could stop them. But before he could voice his concerns, Chancellor Nera continued. The princesses believe in your potential. They believe that your creativity, your problem-solving abilities, and your determination make you the right choice to unite the galaxy against the growing darkness. James shook his head in disbelief. But I'm just a person. I'm no leader. I don't know how to unite the galaxy. I don't even know where to start. We will guide you, Nera said. You are not alone in this. The princesses, along with the council, will support you. But the decision has been made, James. You must come to the Galactic Council at once. The fate of the galaxy depends on you. The journey to the Galactic Council. James had no choice. He packed his things and boarded the next available ship, his mind reeling with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. As the ship soared through the vastness of space, James had a lot of time to think. His whole life had been about discovery, about exploring the unknown and solving problems. But nothing he had ever done had prepared him for this. The ship entered the Zeralian Empire's territory and made its way to the capital planet, Zeralis, a world that glowed with brilliant otherworldly light. As James approached the planet's surface, he couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the grandeur of it all. This was unlike anything he had ever seen, a city that stretched across entire continents, with shining spires that touched the sky. When he landed and was escorted to the Galactic Council's headquarters, he was greeted by Princess Ilona, a noble leader from the Letharian people, known for their wisdom and their commitment to peace. Her presence was calming, but there was no mistaking the intensity in her eyes. "Welcome, James Armitage," she said, extending a hand to him. "We are honored that you have come to take your place among us." James tried to find the right words, but he was still in shock. Everything seemed so surreal, like a dream that he might wake up from at any moment. But he had no time for doubts now. His world had just shifted in ways he couldn't comprehend, and the galaxy was waiting for him to lead it. The Council's expectations. James was soon brought before the full Council, a group of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. He stood there, trying to keep his composure, but it was hard. There were so many eyes on him, and most of them were skeptical. There were murmurs, whispers, and a few questioning glances. It was clear that many of the council members didn't think he was the right choice. High Chancellor Nera stepped forward again, her voice steady but commanding. "James Armitage," she began, "you stand here today as a symbol of our hopes. Your selection was not made lightly. The galaxy is at a crossroads, and the forces of darkness are closing in. The Dark Reavers are an ancient and cunning enemy. We need someone who can unite the galaxy and face them head-on. You have been chosen because the princesses believe you are the key." "I don't understand," James said, his voice shaking slightly. "Why me? What have I done to deserve this?" Princess Naira stood beside him, her eyes filled with sincerity. "You may not remember, but years ago, during the Terra Solar Crisis, you unknowingly thwarted an attack by the Reavers. Your actions, though small at the time, set off a chain of events that has brought us here today." James' mind raced. He had always thought of that time as a turning point in his life, but the idea that he had somehow been a part of something much bigger, something that would lead to his being named the King of the Galaxy, was almost too much to grasp. "The Reavers have seen your potential," Princess Ilona added softly. "They fear you, James, and they will stop at nothing to prevent you from leading the galaxy." James felt a chill run down his spine. His heart pounded in his chest. The weight of the galaxy was now on his shoulders, and he had no idea if he was ready for it. But there was no turning back. James Armitage had barely stepped into the grand halls of the Galactic Council when he began to realize how much he didn't understand about the weight of the situation he was in. The meeting had been a blur of faces and names, most of which he didn't even recognize. Powerful figures from across the galaxy looked at him with a mix of skepticism, curiosity, and most terrifying of all, expectation. But it wasn't the council members or even the looming threat of the Dark Reavers that haunted James's thoughts. It was the young princesses who had chosen him. There was something mysterious about them, something they were keeping hidden from the rest of the council, and it gnawed at him. James had spent the past few hours trying to absorb the information about the galaxy's politics, the Reavers, and his new role as the potential leader of all this chaos. But amid all that, there were moments when his mind returned to the princesses, particularly Princess Naira. She had been the one to seek him out, to choose him to be the next ruler of the galaxy. But why? What was her true reason for putting him in such an impossible position? There had to be more to this story. The hidden truth. After the council session ended, James was escorted back to his temporary quarters, a lavish room that seemed far too grand for a scientist from Earth. The walls were made of shimmering metal, and the bed was softer than anything he had ever felt in his life. There were no windows, but the entire room was bathed in a soft, calming light that seemed to come from nowhere. Still, James couldn't sleep. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. The more he thought about the princesses and the mysterious way they had chosen him, the more he felt like there was something he was missing. Something important. Suddenly, there was a quiet knock on the door. "Come in," James said, trying to hide his surprise. He wasn't expecting anyone. The door slid open, and standing there, looking slightly uncomfortable, was Princess Nyara. She was dressed in a simple white robe, and her silver hair fell around her face in soft waves. Her golden eyes met his, and for a moment, James saw something in them, a mix of determination, fear, and maybe even a hint of sadness. "James," she said softly, entering the room. "I hope I didn't disturb you." James sat up on the bed, blinking in surprise. "No, it's fine. What's going on? Shouldn't you be with the council?" Nyara sighed, stepping closer to him. "I wanted to speak with you alone. There are things you don't know, things the council doesn't know. I trust you, James, and I need to explain them to you." He raised an eyebrow. "Things the council doesn't know? What are you talking about?" She paused for a moment, glancing over her shoulder as if making sure they were truly alone. "I'm going to tell you something important, but you must promise me that you won't tell anyone else. Not yet. Not until the time is right." James felt a strange chill run through him. He had no idea what Nyara was about to say, but he knew it was going to change everything. He nodded, his voice steady. "I promise. Whatever it is, I'll keep it between us." Nyara took a deep breath, as if gathering the strength to speak. "You've heard of the Dark Reavers, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, but only in rumors." "What about them?" James replied. He'd heard stories about the Reavers, how they were a dark force that had attacked many star systems, leaving destruction in their wake. They were like ghosts, appearing suddenly and disappearing just as quickly. No one seemed to know exactly what they were, but their reputation was terrifying. "They are real," Nyara said, her voice tense. "And they are much more dangerous than anyone realizes." James listened closely, his heart beginning to pound. "What do you mean? How can they be more dangerous than we thought?" Nyara looked directly into his eyes, her gaze intense. "The Dark Reavers are not just a threat to the galaxy. They are the reason we chose you to be king." James frowned. "What do you mean? I don't even know anything about them. How could I possibly help?" Nyara seemed to struggle with how to explain. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "The truth is, James, the galaxy is in far more danger than anyone knows. The Reavers are not just an external threat. They are inside us. They have infiltrated the very core of the Council. The war we are fighting is not just against their ships or their armies. It's a war against betrayal." James couldn't believe what he was hearing. Betrayal. But the Council is made up of the most powerful leaders in the galaxy. How could any of them be working with the Reavers? Nyara lowered her voice. "That's the secret I was talking about. Some of the princesses, including myself, have learned the truth. The Reavers have been manipulating our people for years. They have placed agents within the highest ranks of the Council, and some of those agents are now pulling the strings. They've created divisions, planted lies, and sown mistrust. They want the galaxy to fall into chaos." James sat there, stunned. "So you're saying that some of the council members are working with the Reavers?" Nyara nodded. "Yes, and they will stop at nothing to see the galaxy weakened and divided. They know that if we unite, if we stand together, we might be able to defeat them. But if we remain divided, they will take control." James's mind was racing. This was more than just an issue of leadership. It was about survival. The entire galaxy was at risk, and it wasn't just about who would sit on the throne. It was about who could expose the traitors within the council before it was too late. "I'm not ready for this," James admitted, his voice shaky. "I don't know how to stop them. I'm just a scientist." Nyara reached out, placing a hand gently on his. "You may not be ready now, but you will be. You've already proven your worth. The way you solved the Terra Solar crisis, the way you thought outside the box. It's why we chose you. You have the strength, the intelligence, and the heart to lead." James looked at her, trying to take it all in. "So what do we do now? How do we fight this?" Nyara gave him a small, determined smile. "We have to expose the traitors. We have to find out who they are and stop them before they destroy everything. We can't trust anyone in the council. Not yet. But together, we might have a chance." James felt a firelight within him. This wasn't just about a throne. It wasn't about being crowned king. It was about saving everything he knew and everything he cared about. He stood up, determination settling over him. "I'm ready," he said, his voice strong. "Let's do this. Together." Nyara smiled, her eyes filled with a quiet hope. Together. The plan unfolds. Over the next few days, James and Nyara began to piece together a plan. They couldn't trust anyone in the council, at least not yet, but they knew they needed allies. They quietly gathered a small group of trusted individuals from different factions within the galaxy. Together, they would investigate the Reavers' influence on the council and try to uncover who was working with them. As the plan took shape, James felt a sense of purpose growing within him. He had been thrown into this role without warning. But now, he was beginning to see the bigger picture. He wasn't just a leader by chance. He had a role to play in saving the galaxy. And with Nyara by his side, he would face whatever came next. The quiet corridors of the Galactic Council building seemed more oppressive than ever as James Armitage moved through them with Princess Nyara. The once grand halls now felt like a maze of uncertainty. James wasn't sure whom he could trust. He had spent years working with numbers and equations, not navigating the dangerous world of galactic politics. But now, the fate of the galaxy was in his hands, and he couldn't afford to make a mistake. Nyara had made it clear that the threat of the Reavers was far greater than anyone imagined. They weren't just attacking from the outside. They had planted spies, agents, and traitors within the highest ranks of the Council itself. Their influence spread like poison through the galaxy's core. If James was going to stop them, he needed to uncover the traitors within the Council, but finding them wouldn't be easy. The first step, Nyara explained, was a test that the princesses had devised to help determine who could be trusted and who might be working for the Reavers. James had no idea what this test would involve, but from the worried look on Nyara's face, he knew it wasn't going to be something simple. The princesses' test. They were walking through a long, dimly lit hallway now, their footsteps echoing in the silence. James tried to gather his thoughts, but there was too much weighing on him. The princesses had kept him in the dark about most of their plans, only telling him bits and pieces when they thought it was necessary. Nyara had been the only one who seemed to trust him fully, but James still didn't know if he could trust her completely. "We're almost there," Nyara said, breaking the silence. "The test begins now." James turned to look at her. "A test? What kind of test?" Nyara gave him a grave look. "It's a test of trust. We have to see who will follow through with the plan, no matter how difficult it becomes. You have to be strong, James. There's a chance that some of the princesses will try to test you. Don't let it throw you off course." James's heart rate quickened. A test of trust. What did that mean? And who were these princesses who would test him? He wasn't sure what to expect, but one thing was certain. This was going to be harder than anything he had ever faced. They reached a large, ornate door at the end of the hallway. It opened with a soft hiss, revealing a small, circular room. Inside, 3 figures stood, their eyes locked on James the moment he entered. The first was Princess Ilona, the Litharian princess, known for her wisdom and calm demeanor. She had been one of the most vocal supporters of James's appointment as the new king, but there was something in her eyes now that made James uneasy. The second was Princess Kayla, a fiery and passionate ruler from the planet Ryden. She had always been a little more skeptical of James's abilities, but Naira assured him that Kala's opinion didn't matter much in the grand scheme of things. The third was Princess Lyra, a younger princess who had stayed mostly in the shadows, rarely speaking up during the council sessions. But James knew that Lyra held a great deal of power in her words, even if she didn't show it outwardly. As James stepped into the room, the doors slid closed behind him, trapping them all inside. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the uncertainty of what was to come. He turned to face the princesses, trying to steady his nerves. "Welcome, James," Princess Iloma said, her voice as calm and steady as ever. But her eyes were sharp, assessing him in a way that made James feel exposed. "You have come far, but now we need to know if you can handle the weight of what lies ahead." James frowned. "What do you mean? What is this test?" Iloma stepped forward. "The Reavers are not just an enemy we can fight with weapons or strategy alone. They are masters of deception, manipulation, and betrayal. We need to see if you can trust yourself when the people around you may not be who they say they are." "We will each present you with a choice," Kala said, her voice full of challenge. "And we will watch to see what you choose. Each choice will test your loyalty, your leadership, and your ability to act under pressure. If you pass, we will know that you are ready to take on the role of king. If you fail—" Kala's voice trailed off, leaving the threat unspoken. James felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't going to be easy, but he couldn't back down now. Not after everything that had happened. He nodded, determined to prove himself. "I'm ready." Princess Lyra, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "Your first test is this," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You will have to choose between two paths. One will lead to the truth, and the other will lead to disaster. There is no turning back. Once you make your choice, the path you choose will determine the fate of millions." The first test: the path of truth or deception. James stared at Lyra, trying to understand what she meant. Truth. Disaster. What was she talking about? He glanced at Naira, but the princess said nothing, her face carefully neutral. "You have 10 minutes, Lyra continued. "Choose wisely." With that, the room seemed to shift. The walls seemed to melt away, replaced by a vision of two different paths. One path was lit with soft, golden light, and the other was shrouded in darkness. At the end of each path stood two figures, one familiar, one unknown. The golden path led toward a figure he recognized, Chancellor Naira, the leader of the Galactic Council. She was standing in front of a door that had truth written on it. The figure on the dark path was unrecognizable, but he felt a strange sense of unease looking at them. The figure was surrounded by a haze of shadow, as though they were hiding something. James looked from one path to the other, his mind racing. What did it all mean? If he took the path of truth, it would lead him to Chancellor Naira. But something about that felt wrong. Could the council leader really be trusted? And then there was the dark path, the path that seemed to promise danger, but also possibly a way to uncover something hidden. What if the Reavers were behind it all? What if the shadowy figure was one of their spies, trying to manipulate the council? James felt a bead of sweat form on his forehead. He had no way of knowing which path was truly the right one. But he couldn't make a mistake. Lives were at stake. After what felt like an eternity, he finally made his choice. He walked down the golden path toward Chancellor Naira. The consequences of the choice. As he reached the door marked Truth, he felt a strange sense of relief. The door opened slowly, revealing a room filled with light. Inside, Chancellor Naira stood waiting for him. "James," she said, her voice warm but careful. "I knew you would come." But as he stepped into the room, the door slammed shut behind him. James turned quickly, but the light inside the room dimmed, leaving him in shadow. The familiar face of Chancellor Naira twisted into a dark smile. Her eyes turned black, and her voice became cold and menacing. "You chose wrong," she hissed. James froze. He had made the wrong choice. The second test, trust and betrayal. The room around him dissolved, and he was back in the circular room with the princesses, all of them watching him closely. Nyara stood next to him, her expression unreadable. "Well done, James," Princess Iloma said with a smile. "You passed the first test." James was stunned. He had thought he had failed. How could he have passed? The figure had seemed like Nara, but it hadn't been her. "The test," Nyara explained, "was to test your ability to distinguish between what is real and what is not. The Reavers use deception, and sometimes things are not as they seem. Choosing the golden path meant you had the courage to trust yourself." James looked at her, still confused but relieved. "But be careful," Nyara warned. "The tests will get harder. We cannot afford to let our guard down, not now. The Reavers are everywhere." James had always been a man of reason. As a scientist, he had spent years solving complex problems using logic and evidence, but nothing could have prepared him for the twisting, treacherous path that lay ahead. As the days went by, the tension in the Galactic Council only grew. Whispers of betrayal were everywhere, and the shadow of the Dark Reavers loomed larger every moment. James had thought he understood the stakes, but with each passing day, the reality of the situation became more dangerous, more complex. It had all started with a choice, a single decision made by the princesses, and suddenly, James Armitage had become a central figure in a battle that spanned the galaxy. But even now, as the council met to discuss their next move, James wasn't sure what was real and what was a carefully crafted lie. One thing was certain: the Reavers were far more powerful than they had initially seemed. Their influence wasn't just felt in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. It was here, in the heart of the Galactic Council, hiding beneath the surface like a venomous snake, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The calm before the storm. James sat in the council hall, his hands resting on the cold surface of the council table. The room was filled with the galaxy's most powerful leaders, but the air felt thick with distrust. He glanced around, trying to read the faces of those present. Chancellor Nera, the woman who had greeted him so warmly just days ago, was sitting at the head of the table. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes occasionally flicked to James, and he could feel the weight of her gaze. Beside him, Princess Nyara shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had been quiet for most of the meeting, her hands folded tightly in front of her. James knew that something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. The council had been discussing strategies for dealing with the Reavers, but every plan seemed to be laced with doubt and hesitation. Finally, Chancellor Nera spoke, her voice breaking the heavy silence. "We need to act, and we need to act now," she said, her tone sharp. "The Reavers have attacked several systems already. If we don't respond quickly, we could lose everything." James had heard this before. It was the same argument they'd been making for days. But what bothered him was the way Nera said it. Too forcefully, too confidently. It was as though she already knew what was going to happen next. Her eyes never left him as she spoke, and James couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He turned to Nyara, who had been unusually quiet. She met his gaze for a moment before speaking in a low voice. "Something's not right. I can feel it, James. The Reavers are already among us." James raised an eyebrow. "You mean within the council? Among the leaders?" Nyara nodded, her expression tense. "Yes, and I think we've been blind to it. The Reavers have been planting their agents for years. Some of them are sitting right here in this room." James's heart skipped a beat. The council was filled with powerful figures, many of whom James had come to respect over the past few days. Could one of them really be a traitor? The thought seemed impossible, but Nyara's warning couldn't be ignored. A hidden message. Just as the tension seemed to reach its peak, the doors to the council hall slid open with a soft hiss, and a messenger entered, holding a small glowing device in his hand. He walked quickly to Chancellor Nera, who took the device from him without a word. The room went silent as Nera activated the device. A holographic image appeared above it, showing a dark, twisted figure, one that James instantly recognized. It was one of the Dark Reavers. The figure's eyes glowed red, and his voice was cold and menacing. To the Galactic Council, your time is running out. The war has already begun, and your defenses are useless. You cannot stop us. We have already infiltrated your ranks. You are surrounded. A hologram flickered for a moment before the image of the Reaver disappeared, leaving only a dark void. The room was still. A chill settled over James as he realized that the message had been meant for them all. The Reavers weren't just waiting at the galaxy's borders. They had already infiltrated the highest levels of power. Chancellor Nera's face was pale, and her hand shook slightly as she deactivated the device. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with an edge of anger in her voice, she spoke. This is a direct threat. The Reavers have clearly targeted us, and we have no time to waste. We must move forward with the plan. We cannot show weakness. But James didn't miss the way her voice wavered. Her confidence from earlier had disappeared. Something had changed, and he knew that Nera was hiding something. The truth unfolds. Nyara leaned closer to James, her voice barely above a whisper. That message, it was a warning. The Reavers know we're onto them. They've planted their agents in our midst, and they're starting to reveal themselves. James nodded slowly, his mind racing. But Nera, she seems to be panicking. If she's one of them, why does she seem so shaken? Nyara's eyes narrowed. That's what worries me. Maybe she's not one of them, but she knows who is. She's been part of the Reaver's plan all along. Her fear isn't from the message. It's from something else. Something we haven't uncovered yet. James swallowed hard. If Nara was involved, it meant the Reavers were much closer to taking control of the galaxy than they had realized. He needed to be careful. Trusting the wrong person could be the end of everything. A dangerous alliance. That night, as the council adjourned, James couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. He and Nyara slipped out of the council chambers, hoping to find some answers. The corridors of the council building were eerily quiet, but James felt a sense of urgency creeping over him. They had to find the traitors before the Reavers made their next move. As they walked through the halls, they were approached by Princess Kayla, the fiery Rhydonian princess. Her face was tight with frustration. "I'm glad I found you," she said. "I need to talk to you, James. There's something I've discovered, something the council doesn't know." James looked at her warily. He knew Kayla's skepticism about him, but now there was a sense of desperation in her voice. "What is it?" he asked. Kayla glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "I've been looking into the council's security. I've uncovered something disturbing. Some of our highest-ranking officials are working with the Reavers. They've been feeding them information for months." James' stomach churned. "Who?" Kayla shook her head. "I can't say yet. I need more time to gather evidence, but I'm certain. There's a conspiracy, and we're being led straight into a trap." James felt a chill spread through him. He had known that something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed by Kayla made it all the more real. The Reavers weren't just lurking on the outskirts of the galaxy. They were inside the heart of the council, working in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "We need to act fast," James said, his voice firm. "The council doesn't know the danger we're in. We have to stop them before it's too late." Kayla nodded. "I agree, but we can't do it alone. We need to gather more allies, trusted allies who are willing to fight the Reavers. If we don't act now, the galaxy will fall." The final decision. As James and Nyara walked through the halls with Kayla, the weight of the decision before them seemed heavier than ever. The Reavers were no longer just an enemy at the galaxy's edge. They were already inside, infiltrating the highest ranks of power. The princesses were right to trust James with this responsibility, but he felt the burden of leadership pressing down on him. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about saving the galaxy from complete destruction. He knew that they couldn't wait any longer. They had to expose the traitors and stop the Reavers before their plan could fully unfold. But what if they were already too late? As the night grew darker, James's thoughts turned to the future. He didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain. The war was about to take a dangerous turn, and the galaxy's fate rested on their ability to uncover the truth before the Reavers could strike. The galaxy had been at war for longer than most could remember. For centuries, different species and planets had fought for power, for control, and for survival. The Galactic Council, once a symbol of unity, had become a fragmented shell of what it was meant to be. Corruption, betrayal, and the constant threat of the Reavers had torn the Council apart. But now, in the wake of everything that had happened, something new was beginning to take shape. A change was in the air. James Armitage, the man who had once been a scientist studying the stars, was now at the center of this change. He had become a king in the eyes of the princesses, a leader among the stars, though he still felt like an outsider. The weight of the crown, the responsibility of the galaxy's future, was heavier than he could have imagined. Yet despite the burden, James had one goal: to bring unity to the galaxy, to end the endless wars, and to create a lasting peace. But that was easier said than done. A new dawn. The council hall was filled with murmurs and whispers. It was early morning, and sunlight streamed in through the large windows, casting a golden glow across the room. James sat at the head of the table, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. Beside him sat Princess Mayara, who had been his most trusted ally since this all began. Her strength, wisdom, and unwavering determination had kept him grounded in the darkest of times. But even with Nyara's support, James knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The Reavers were still out there, hidden in the shadows. They had already infiltrated the council and were pulling strings from behind the scenes. The galaxy was divided, and trust was at an all-time low. James had no idea who to trust anymore. The sound of the doors opening pulled him from his thoughts. One by one, the other princesses began to file in. Princess Ilona, the calm and wise leader of the Litharian people, walked in first, her eyes steady but tired. Princess Kayla, the fiery and passionate leader of the Rhydon people, followed closely behind, her face tense with worry. And lastly, Princess Lyra, the young but powerful leader of a smaller planet, entered, her steps measured and careful. They all took their seats around the table, and for a moment, the room was quiet. Nyara spoke first, her voice soft but firm. "We need to talk about what comes next. The Reavers are still a threat, but we can't fight them alone. The galaxy needs to come together, or we'll fall one by one." James nodded in agreement. "I know. But how? How do we convince the rest of the galaxy to unite? So many people still distrust the Council. So many are afraid of the unknown." Ilona, who had been silent up until now, spoke up. "Trust is the key. The galaxy doesn't trust us, James. It doesn't trust the Council. We've spent too many years fighting each other, and the people have grown tired of broken promises. But we can change that. We have the power to build something new. We can lead the galaxy toward peace, but it has to come from us." The road to unity. The conversation continued late into the night. Every princess in the room had a different perspective on how to approach the problem. Kayla was outspoken and wanted to take immediate action. She believed that the galaxy would only unite if the Council took a strong, aggressive stance against the Reavers. "We need to show them we're not weak," she argued. "The galaxy respects strength. If we want their respect, we need to take control." But Ilona disagreed. "Strength is important, but unity is more so. We need to build trust first. Only once we've shown the galaxy that we can be trusted to lead will they join us. We have to build a foundation of peace." Lyra, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, finally spoke up. "What if we took a different approach? What if we reached out to the people directly? Instead of waiting for them to come to us, what if we went to them?" The room fell silent. James turned to Lyra, intrigued by her suggestion. "What do you mean?" Lyra looked at him steadily. "The people are tired of waiting for a change that never comes. What if we travel to the outer systems, to the planets that feel forgotten by the Council? What if we showed them that we are not just leaders, but allies? What if we listened to them?" There was a murmur of agreement around the table. James felt a spark of hope. Lyra was right. The people of the galaxy needed more than just promises. They needed to see action. They needed to feel that the Council, and by extension, the galaxy's leaders, cared about them. "Maybe that's what we need to do," James said slowly. "We go to the people. We show them we're not just leaders hiding behind walls. We fight for them, not just for power." The great journey begins. The decision was made. The Council would send a delegation of leaders to the farthest corners of the galaxy to speak to the people directly. Princess Nyara, of course, would be part of the mission, and James himself would lead it. They would visit the outer systems, where the Reavers had made their greatest inroads. They would listen to the concerns of the people, show them the strength of unity, and prove that the Galactic Council could be trusted. But the journey wouldn't be easy. The outer systems were dangerous, filled with lawlessness and uncertainty. The Reavers had a strong presence in these areas, and there was no guarantee that they would not try to sabotage the mission. Still, James felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt before. This wasn't just about fighting the Reavers or dealing with political intrigue. This was about giving the people of the galaxy something to believe in, a chance for hope. The preparations were swift. The princesses worked together, rallying their forces and securing transportation. The mission was a bold one, and there were those within the Council who were hesitant about it. Some thought it was a fool's errand, believing that the people wouldn't listen. But James was determined. The first stop, the planet Roche. The first planet they visited was Roche, a mining world on the edge of the galaxy. The people of Roche had long been neglected by the Council, their voices unheard in the halls of power. The planet was rich in resources, but the workers lived in poverty, and the planet's leadership had been corrupted by greed. James and the princesses arrived in a large transport ship, greeted by a crowd of thousands. The people were skeptical, their eyes filled with doubt. Many of them had heard promises from the Council before, only to see them broken time and time again. But James stepped forward, his heart pounding. He spoke from the heart, telling the people of Roche that he understood their pain and their frustration. He promised that the Council would work to fix the injustices they had suffered. He promised that they wouldn't be forgotten anymore. The people listened in silence, and for the first time in a long while, they began to hope. At the end of his speech, James opened the floor to questions. People stood up, asking about the future of their planet, about jobs, about education, about healthcare. The princesses answered each question, and for the first time, the people felt like their voices mattered. A growing movement. As they traveled from planet to planet, James saw the change happening. The people were responding. Slowly but surely, the barriers between the Council and the galaxy's citizens began to crumble. The message of unity and hope spread, and with it, the Reavers' grip on the galaxy began to weaken. The people were no longer just pawns in a game. They were becoming part of the solution. The princess's plan was working. More and more systems pledged their allegiance to the Council. Even some of the planets that had been under the Reavers' influence began to turn against them. It was a slow process, but it was happening. James knew there was still much work to be done. The Reavers were a dangerous enemy, and they wouldn't give up easily. But for the first time in a long while, James felt hope. The galaxy could be united. The people could be brought together. And the Galactic Council, with all its power, could lead them into a new era of peace. The final test. As they approached the final stop on their journey, James felt a surge of pride. The galaxy was beginning to change. The unification was within reach. But there was still one last test, a final confrontation with the Reavers. The mission wasn't complete yet, And James knew that the true battle was still ahead. Would they succeed? Could they stop the Reavers once and for all? Or would the galaxy fall back into chaos? The answer, James knew, depended on something more important than strength or power. It depended on trust, on unity, and he was willing to fight for it.